establishment hates him so much. That's one of the many reasons why the establishment, both in Westminster and in the media, and some in our own party, want to get rid of him. Because on the issue of Palestine, just like on the issue of the economy, he stands for the weak against the strong. So that's something very practical we can do. And I'm not going to use this as a recruiting sergeant, but if you agree with what I say, then join up to the Labour Party and join the campaign for a government that will take an independent international policy so that we can be proud of our government's role in the world. So we don't need to be ashamed that our country becomes known for bombing and brutalising other nations, so that we know that Britain becomes what it should always have been, but seldom has been, a beacon of hope and human rights in our world.
कश्मीर फ़लस्तीन दुनिया के बड़े मसाइल, मुझे एतराफ़ में कोई खौफ नहीं कि मसला फ़लस्तीन बरतानिया का पैदा करदा है। फ़लस्तीन के उजड़े घर इजरायली मज़ालिम का मुँह बोलता सबूत हैं। इस बात पर फ़ख्र है कि मेंबर पार्लियामेंट बनने के बाद मसला फ़लस्तीन और कश्मीर को उजागर कराया। मेरी ज़िंदगी की ख्वाहिश है कि मेरी ज़िंदगी में बैनुल-अक़वामी मसाइल हल हों और दुनिया अमन का गहवरा बने। इन ख्यालात का इज़हार शैडो मिनिस्टर और ईस्ट लीड्स से मेंबर ऑफ पार्लियामेंट रिचर्ड बर्गन ने बांग्लादेशी कम्यूनिटी सेंटर में फ़लस्तीन पर होने वाले मज़ालिम के हवाले से बरतानवी मेंबरान पार्लियामेंट के दौरा के बाद मालूमाती कॉन्फ्रेंस से खिताब करते हुए कही, जिसका इनकाद साबिक़ लॉर्ड मेयर लीड्स काउंसलर इकबाल समेत दीगर काउंसलरों ने किया। रिचर्ड बर्गन ने कहा कि मसला ब्रिटिश हुकूमत का पैदा करदा है जो 1948 से चला आ रहा है। मुझे इस बात पर एतराफ़ पर कोई खौफ नहीं कि जिस तरह इजरायली हुकूमत ने फ़लस्तीनी कौम को दुराए पर ला खड़ा किया है, इसमें ज़्यादा हाथ बरतानवी हुकूमतों का है। इस मौका पर काउंसलर लीड्स सिटी काउंसिल, काउंसलर गुलाम हुसैन, काउंसलर असगर खान, काउंसलर जावेद अख्तर, काउंसलर पॉलिन ग्राम, काउंसलर रॉन समेत लीड्स की सियासी समाजी शख्सियात ने भरपूर शिरकत की। तकरीब से टीचर रहनुमा समिया जान ने भी खिताब किया। इस मौका पर मेहमान ख़ुसूसी रिचर्ड बर्गन ने अपने मज़ीद खिताब में कहा,
for the people, not just in this constituency and in this city, but in Palestine, Kashmir and around the world as well. And I do know that if Councillor Arif Hussain had been in the country, he'd have welcomed you all personally to his ward tonight, his ward of Gipton and Harehills. And it's fantastic to hear Causa speak tonight. I'm proud that she's the deputy head teacher of the school, one of the schools in my constituency, Bankside Primary, and I went to see the school council there. They gave me a tougher grilling than any group of MPs has ever given me. They gave me a tougher grilling than any group of Labour Party members have given me, and I enjoyed it immensely. Tonight I want to talk to you all about internationalism, because that's the reason we're here today. And Che Guevara, a great internationalist, said a true man should feel on his cheek the blow against the cheek of any man. And I'll modernise that quote and say a true person should feel on his or her cheek the blow against the cheek of any other person. But in that quote that quote encapsulates the spirit of internationalism, the spirit that in the trade union, as the trade union saying goes, an injury to one is an injury to all. And we're here not, as Causa herself explains, not to give to the Palestinian people as if we're the rich people giving them charity. We're here to show solidarity with the Palestinian people. And that's why myself and a group of Labour members of Parliament went to illegally occupied Palestine in the break from parliamentary business a few weeks ago. Now, I'm not one of those MPs who believes that being a member of Parliament is some sort of licence to print free plane tickets at the public expense. I don't believe that's the job of Member of Parliament. But I did promise before I was selected and before I was elected to go to two places to see the situation there with my own eyes. Firstly, I promised I would go to illegally occupied Palestine, and secondly, I promised I would go to Kashmir, two places very close to the hearts of freedom-loving people in East Leeds and freedom-loving people around the world. It's a great shame that, as Councillor Iqbal says, Imran Hussain, my friend and colleague, the Labour MP for Bradford East and a shadow international development minister, can't be with us tonight because of a family emergency, which has meant that tomorrow night's meeting that both he and I were doing in Bradford has to be postponed as well. But what we saw with our own eyes in illegally occupied Palestine makes me think this thing in particular. I'd like to see every member of Parliament, regardless of political party, go to Palestine to see that with their own eyes. And the reason I say that is because the charitable person, the positive person within me, thinks that any MP, regardless of their view, even MPs who believe it's somehow appropriate to try and justify the heinous actions of the government of Israel, any MP, in my view, that saw with their own eyes the situation faced by the Palestinian people would, I hope, think again and realise that the cause of right is on the side of the Palestinian people who have been so badly treated for so many decades. And of course, Britain played a special role in creating the mess in Palestine, just as Britain played a special role, or rather the ruling elite in Britain played a special role in creating so many messes around the world. Because it was public school educated bureaucrats and politicians from the ruling elites in Britain in 1948 who decided to give the land of one people to another people on behalf of a third people. So like so many disasters in world history, I'm sorry to say, it was a disaster made in Britain, or rather a disaster made by the British ruling elite. So I want to share with you tonight some of the things I saw when I was in illegally occupied Palestine. I want to talk about the illegal Israeli settlements, the illegal Israeli outposts. I want to talk about Palestinian communities suffering under occupation. I want to talk about Bedouin communities whose way of life is threatened by Israel's government. And I want to talk about the valuable work of medical aid for Palestinians and other aid agencies. And I want to talk about the realities that we saw with our own eyes of Israel's military courts. But before I do so, I want to return to the word I used at the beginning of my remarks tonight, that word internationalism, which is so important. What marks out the issue of Israel and Palestine above many other crucially important issues? The thing that marks it out is that any member of Parliament who speaks up for the Palestinian people is opening themselves up to special criticism, is opening themselves up to special attack. So whilst we all support various internationalist causes around the world, there are some that it is harder for some MPs to support than other causes, because the false accusations fly as soon as you support the people of Palestine. And I myself, in some small way, was attacked when I was accused of a false and outrageous slander by a supporter of the Israeli government, by a very well-connected supporter of the government of Israel. And I was glad that a written apology for that was issued, and a clarification. So I want to talk about the things that we saw whilst we were there. We went to the remote South Hebron hills, to a village called Jimba, a very remote area. And there we saw the rubble of homes demolished by the government of Israel. There we saw, in fact, a facility paid for with your money, paid for with the money of Britain's Department for International Development. We saw the rubble of that destroyed building. And seeing a facility that British taxpayers had paid for in illegally occupied Palestine, smashed to pieces by the bulldozers of the government of Israel, made me reflect yet again. The government of Israel thinks it can do whatever it likes to whoever it likes, and that there's no consequence whatsoever. And of course, that is the case, and the record of the government of Israel shows that. How many United Nations resolutions has the government of Israel ignored? How many international condemnations has the government of Israel brushed off as if they don't matter? And we saw that the family who had lived in that demolished home had returned to their older cultural practice of living in a cave whilst a new house was being rebuilt by local people. But as they rebuilt that house, brick by brick, they knew that at any moment, at any time, in the day or in the night, the bulldozers of the government of Israel could return and smash not only their home, but smash their dreams to smithereens. But it was great to see the dignity that this family and their community in Jimba, in the remote South Hebron Hills, showed in the face of cruelty. And on the journey between a Palestinian village called Susia and the Palestinian village of Jimba that I've just mentioned, we were confronted by unnerving Israeli settlers and machine gun wielding Israeli Defence Force soldiers who were very interested in what we were up to and were very interested in what we were trying to see, and probably very interested in what we report back once we'd seen it. But one of the most remarkable things you see when you visit illegally occupied Palestine is the illegal Israeli settlements and outposts. Before I went there, I'd imagined that there might just be 4 or 5 houses of extremists located here or there, maybe very basic structures since they're being built illegally. But what I saw were vast complexes with vast professional building operations going on, caterpillar trucks and hundreds of houses, hundreds of plush houses being put up. This wasn't any ramshackle operation. And when you see the illegal settlements rising here, there and everywhere, what you realise is that the law does not apply to some states, seemingly. And the fact is, when you look at the location of the illegal Israeli outposts, they're being deliberately located, not just anywhere, but in places which geographically and physically make the two-state solution that many hypocritical Zionist politicians talk about an impossibility. Because that's the truth. Because when you hear in the past President Netanyahu from the Likud party in the Israeli Knesset talk about his hopes in the past for a two-state solution, I believe that's just rhetoric in order to make those politicians seem reasonable. So at the same time using that rhetoric, they are taking every practical and political step they can to make the two-state solution of which they talk practically impossible. And we also visited the Palestinian village of Bet Ijiza, and that's an illegal Israeli settlement surrounds that village, and the illegal Israeli settlement's called Givon Hadasha. And we visited a family, and it's a shame that the projector's not working because that's brought photos to show you the scenes that we saw. But this family, who had lived in this house for generations, had been fenced in by the southern building of this illegal Israeli settlement. And a fence probably 20 feet high had been erected on both sides of the drive that led from the main road to their house. The fence, 20 feet high, encircled the garden. And at the end of the drive, leading from the main road to their house, the Israeli settlers, with the connivance of the Israeli Defence Force, had erected a huge metal gate that only opened at a certain time every day when they could leave their home. And what's more, above the gate had been, and I looked at it myself, an armed sentry with cameras on the top, and an Israeli Defence Force soldier was posted at the top, watching them going in and going out of their house. It was only after a legal case was brought with the assistance of the Palestinian Authority that armed sentry was de-armed, that armed sentry, although its remains do remain, was taken out of operation. And it was quite incredible, being in their house, being in their garden, being in the drive that leads up to their house, honestly did feel, and I make no exaggeration, like being in a prison. A prison not, of course, of their own making, a prison of the making of the illegal Israeli settlers. And the abuse that this family faced was quite horrendous, because the objective of these illegal Israeli settlers was to remove them from the house. They could demolish it, so that no trace of any Palestinian community was left in that area. So they treated them badly, they intimidated them, they made their life as hard as possible in the hope that they would leave their family home. But all credit to them, they didn't leave their family home. But what they did do, what they felt they had to do, was erect a green screen made of plastic around the first 5 or 6 feet up on the fence, on their side of the fence, to shield them from the abuse and thrown objects of the illegal Israeli settlers. But when I said earlier that the illegal Israeli outposts and illegal Israeli settlements aren't full of mad, wild-eyed lunatics that you might see on a Louis Theroux show. In fact, the illegal Israeli settlements that I've mentioned, the illegal Israeli settlement of Givon Hadasha, people housed there include senior members, I was told, of the Israeli army. People housed there include senior members, I'm told, of the Israeli Navy. And it is, in fact, the case that last week in the British Parliament, the Speaker, their equivalent of John Bercow in Parliament, the Speaker of the Israeli Knesset, came to speak in the British Parliament. And guess where he lives? Guess where he lives? He lives in an illegal Israeli settlement. So once you understand that, once you understand that the Speaker of the Israeli Knesset lives in an illegal Israeli settlement, once you understand that senior ministers in that government live in illegal Israeli settlements, then you know that when you hear them talk about a two-state solution, they're lying. Then you know that when they talk about respect for the Palestinian people, they're lying. And then you know when these politicians come to Britain and use their warm words, they're trying to deceive us all. But many of us, including everyone in this room, can't be deceived. But I was inspired when I was in illegally occupied Palestine to meet with a former member of the Israeli Defence Force, because every Israeli citizen is conscripted into the Israeli Defence Force. And this man, who was a couple of years younger than me, had set up a group called Breaking the Silence, because what he saw as a conscript, as a citizen of the State of Israel, as a conscript in the Israeli Defence Force, what he saw in those 3 years, and he did have command of a number of soldiers beneath him, what he saw made him think. What he saw made him think that what the government of Israel is doing to the people of Palestine cannot be in any way justified. So when his military conscription was finished, when those 3 years were over, he formed a group called Breaking the Silence. And he's quite clear in his objective. His objective is to end injustice for the Palestinian people, but also to end the illegal occupation of Palestine. So has this made him popular with the government in Israel? Has this made him popular with the establishment in Israel? No, it hasn't. In fact, he is referred to as, this is true, this is a conservative journalist, he probably wants to know what I'm saying. I'll try and turn this off. I'm happy to say it to myself. Okay. Just bear with me. I've got that happening again. There we are. Yeah, so he set up this group. You can edit that bit out. This is where the experts come in. So it's seamless. So there's no gap in my speech. This group, Breaking the Silence, was inspirational, but he was referred to by senior members of the government of Israel as a traitor to the state of Israel. But I don't believe, and I know that you don't believe either, that someone like that's a traitor. I believe that those who speak up against the powerful interests, for an end to human rights abuses, for justice, I believe they are the real heroes. Just as I believe the thousands of Israeli citizens who marched in Tel Aviv in summer 2014, when the bombs of the Israeli government were raining down on the besieged people of Gaza, I believe they're heroes too. I believe it's important that we march here, as we did, and we demonstrated in that summer and after. But how hard is it for the Israeli citizens to do that? So I think we should hold them in the highest regard for breaking the silence, for speaking out, for becoming pariahs sometimes, pariahs in their own community. And it's people like that, just as it's people like Nelson Mandela, that really make history. And I remember visiting on our delegation the old city of Jerusalem that Causa has mentioned, and there we visited the home of a Palestinian family who had lived there since 1953. And illegal Israeli settlers are again trying to drive them out of their property. To such an extent, I've got all the photos to prove this. It's a shame that I can't share them with you tonight, although I did put them on social media every night when I got back to the hotel during our delegation. But they came home one day to find that the main entrance to the courtyard of their house had disappeared. The entrance, and I saw it myself, had been bricked up and had become the new wall of the next door neighbour's house. They had to go in through the back entrance. They came in one night to hear a tremendously awful sound, and they walked into the children's bedroom and found that there were 5 huge holes in the wall where these illegal Israeli settlers had drilled through. And I saw those holes, how they'd been filled in with cement by the family afterwards. I saw that with my very own eyes. And they could be evicted at any moment. They're staving off eviction. So that's the truth that we saw there, whatever the mainstream media might say. And I do want to talk about the military courts that we visited there. Now, the military court that we visited was in Area C of occupied Palestine. So it's a military court in a place where a military court of any description or a court of the State of Israel should not be. And we went through the football turnstile style entrance into the waiting area, the uncovered waiting area, where Palestinian families were waiting to see their children put on trial. Children as young as 12 who get sentences of up to 20 years for the crime of throwing a stone at an Israeli tank in illegally occupied Palestine. And we spoke to these families, some through a translator, some in English, and they told us about their experiences. And what surprised me, but now I understand it, is that they weren't upset about the sentences their children may or may not, in their view, be about to get. They were actually excited and pleased at the opportunity to see their children for 10 minutes in the dock, because they hadn't seen them for months, because they'd been kept there before the trial. And they knew, they didn't concern themselves with whether or not their child would get a sentence, a custodial sentence. They knew, as sure as night follows day, that they would get a sentence. So they dealt with that already. There was nothing to worry about. Will he or she get a sentence or not? They knew they would get a sentence. So they just saw it as an opportunity to reconnect with their loved ones, which is why it's not uncommon in such circumstances. In fact, I understand it's the usual thing for Palestinian defendants to ask and shout out from the dock to the parents in the public gallery, or the parents in the chairs at the back. How's my uncle doing? How's my auntie doing? How's so-and-so doing? And in those few minutes, in those few seconds, exchange news from the outside world. And what also made a big impression on me was the fact that the military judge, and this is standard practice, gave the charge sheets in the courts in Hebrew, even though the vast majority of defendants only speak Arabic. So that was a dreadful thing to see. And what is true as well is, a man said to me in the waiting area, he said, "I don't mean this to be disrespectful, it's a bit," and these are his words, "we will never forgive the British for bringing the Israelis here." Those were his words. And of course, I said to him that the British ruling elite, past and present, is responsible for huge crimes against humanity. Good question there. I felt like I'd been asked a question about the Spanish Inquisition. There's an important point you made, how to change people's minds. Because if the balance of power in Parliament remains as it is, then we won't get in Parliament the change that we need. Because people forget that when we won that historic and symbolic vote on calling on the UK government to recognise the state of Palestine, lots of the opponents of Palestine, lots of the supporters of the government of Israel didn't turn up. They responded, lots of them, by treating the vote with contempt, by not turning up. So it isn't the case, in my view, that the majority of British parliamentarians are committed yet to justice for the people of Palestine. I'll tell you what I think the best way to convert a supporter of the government of Israel is: to demand that your MP, if they're a supporter of the government of Israel, goes on the delegation that I went on. And the organisation that organised it is called CABU. And what does that stand for, Ben? CABU?
Council for the Advancement of Arab British Understanding.
That's right, the Council for the Advancement of Arab-British Understanding. That wasn't a test for him, I'd actually forgotten. So CABU would organise that in association with the Medical Aid for Palestinians. So that's the delegation I believe they should go on. And when they come back, ask them to speak at a meeting and tell you what conclusion they've come to. And if they don't change their mind from supporting and excusing the government of Israel for what they do, then draw your own conclusions about the attitude you should take towards them. So I think allowing them to learn, encouraging them to learn, rather than condemning them, is the best way to change their minds. And I'll tell you this for free: there were people on our delegation, not myself or Imran, who historically had taken a different view on the question of Palestine to myself and Imran. And I know for a fact from speaking to them that what they saw there affected them greatly, and what they saw made them think again. Asghar asks about UN resolutions. Isn't it funny? Some UN resolutions are more powerful than others. Some UN resolutions that don't even exist have more power than UN resolutions that do exist. And to broaden it out, let me tell you this: there was no UN resolution authorising the bombing of Syria by the United Kingdom. So if anyone claims that there was a UN resolution which in law permitted or instructed the bombing of Syria by the UK government, then at the very best, they're rather confused. So that was a UN resolution that didn't exist, that was used by some to argue we should bomb Syria. But there are plenty of UN resolutions condemning the state of Israel for the illegal blockade of Gaza. There are plenty of UN resolutions speaking out against the illegal settlements and the illegal occupation of Palestine in the West Bank. And we need to make sure that international law is put in order